welcome to Adventures of a Black Woman Sailor. My name is Sarah Scott, and this channel is about all the projects I'm doing on my Rawson 30 sailboat. My goal is to single-hand the boat around Vancouver Island in August of 2019, and I have quite a few projects to do until then. I am right in the middle of recoring the bow, my V-berth. There was some water that got in underneath the windlass, and I've taken out the old core. I've removed the bottom layer of fiberglass and all the rotten balsa wood. I've also bought an 8-foot by 4-foot panel of a composite called coosa board, which is a wood substitute that does not rot or absorb water. And I've cut the coosa board into panels according to a template that I made of the roof of my bow. And in this episode I am going to be scoring the pieces because the deck of my boat is curved and I'd like them to have some more flexibility to fit them up against the roof. And I'm also going to be epoxying the pieces into the bow. For most of the panels, I've got the saw set at a 10mm depth, but when I do the edges that have been fared down to 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to reduce that to 6mm so that it doesn't go through the coosa board. I'm scoring it in both directions because the deck does not just curve to the sides, it also curves from front to back. For the bow peak panel, the roof of the V-berth curves a lot, so that's why I've got the really close together scoring grooves in the middle of it. All the pieces are done now, so it's time to go to the boat and start playing with the epoxy. I just bought the West System epoxy resin with the slow hardener. In case I make any mistakes, I want to have time to fix them, so I didn't want it to harden too fast. And then I got the 406 colloidal silica to thicken the epoxy so that it won't drip so much. And got mixing buckets, glue brushes, anything else I can need to apply it, and ready to go. I'm just in the middle of trimming down the wooden rods that I'm using to prop up the coosa board against the roof of the bow. I like to cut as many as possible so that I can make it conform to all of the contours of the deck, so that there won't be any gaps between the coosa board and the deck where the epoxy isn't touching. So I measure them by sticking them up against the roof and then make a mark pretty well down from that so that I can have some extra room. And then I just cut them with some titanium coated scissors. Pretty easy. I'm mixing some concentrated citrus wonder into some water so that I can wipe down the entire surface of the roof before I wet it out with epoxy. I bought a roll of blue painter's tape with film from Fisheries Supply to protect the floor of the V-berth. There's going to be a lot of epoxy dripping down from the panels once I put them up against the roof. I'm just trying to heat up the resin and hardener a little bit so that it won't get any air bubbles in it when I mix it. West System Epoxy has a nifty 5-to-1 ratio in their pumps that's already factored in, so you just have to do 1 pump of the resin and 1 pump of the hardener, and it calculates that for you. And here I am adding some colloidal silica, which is a thickening and strengthening agent. And the reason I'm wetting out the roof as well as wetting out the tops of the panels is because epoxy cures best when it's wet on wet. I'm just kind of smoothing it all along. So far, the wooden rods idea is working just as well as I'd hoped it could. You just wedge them underneath and get them to a place where they're really tight against the top, because it does resist a bit when you're trying to bend it according to the score line, so you do have to get it in there pretty tightly. Since the rods were all slightly different lengths, I used whatever I had on hand to get them to reach the roof: a cutting board, a paintbrush, rags, and I used way more rods than I needed because in case one of them fell down when I went away, I didn't want it to ruin the whole cure, and I still wanted the panel to stay in place. Since this is called Adventures of a Black Woman Sailor, I just wanted to assure you that I do in fact sail. This is the Foul Weather Bluff race in the middle of the Puget Sound near Seattle.
The weather is so foul.
The weather is so foul.
Yeah, Green Buoy Tug Mountain. When that's in line, I'm going to start thinking about heating up.
Green Buoy Tug Mountain. Correct. It's a drinking game.
That's right. You should be doing for which angle depending on the wind speed. So,
It's like what's
Is that like the little notes you usually have?
Yeah, we had that chart.
Yeah.
So the actual, the polars is a, and I can show you the one for this boat, but it's
After the day of racing, I was so tired. It took us about 10 hours and we had to retire from the race, and I was trimming the mainsail the whole time. And I knew I had to come here tonight anyway because there was a leak where the holes were, where the hose pipe was, and I had to take the bolts out in order to sand down the surface. So now the water is coming in to the bow, and I have to plug it up now because I have a dry window. Seattle is very rainy, so I only have between now and 9 a.m. when it's not supposed to rain for the next however long, I don't know. So, but now I'm here, I've started to work, and I feel invigorated because I'm into what I'm doing, so that's good. I thought a good way to plug up the hole would just be to epoxy in the bow peak panel because it's right underneath the bolt holes, and also I might be able to get some epoxy around the edges of it to stop whatever water is coming in from dripping all the way down to the balsa core at the edge of where my project is. These rods were hard to put in because you have to situate them about 90 degrees from the surface of the anchor chain locker, and you have to figure out how to cut them and how short to cut them in order for that to work. This is the first panel that I put the epoxy into the grooves and it didn't just drip out all over the place because I got an idea to put wax paper on top of it because wax paper doesn't stick to epoxy. So I filled it in with the thickened epoxy. I put the wax paper on and then I turned it upside down and I put it onto the deck. Shit. it does work. Not quite as easy as I thought it'd be, but a lot easier than having to do the grooves upside down with epoxy dripping all over the place. So I think I'm gonna stick with this method. I've gotten this panel up. I just really hope these stay while I'm gone. So far so good, but this is the only thing I can think to do right now. And I took a piece of a wood rod and propped up the panel with it. I wrapped the tip with wax paper so it wouldn't get stuck later. And this was fun. These big panels take so much epoxy because you're multiplying the surface with the area in the scored grooves. So I must have used about 18 pumps of resin and 18 pumps of hardener for just this one panel. Well, I'm all done putting the panels into the boat, and the only thing I have left to do in this project is glass them in, which means I'll be covering this whole surface with some fiberglass mat and epoxy. And I also have to inject some epoxy into some holes I'm going to drill on the top of the deck because the pieces weren't perfectly cut and I don't want there to be any voids. I want this all to just be solid. So that's going to be in the next episode, and stay tuned. Thanks for watching.